This is deep dish, right?
Yeah, but let's get deep.
So I'm going deep on both sides.
Timothy Hughes, man, finally.
Finally, long time coming.
We got you here.
Yeah.
Oh, man. This gonna be one of them ones, man.
Yeah, man, I'm hoping so.
It's gonna be one of them ones, man. And I'm gonna tell you one of my fondest moments of you. And this is when we kind of first met when I came back from China, right? You came up to me and said, "Hey, man, I was watching something. I think he was watching something of mine, or something Black Americans Making Them Our Stories.
Yes,
you was watching something,
yes.
and you was with your son, I believe.
So my grandson was there.
Your grandson was there, and you was like, "Man, my grandson seen you." Was like, "Yeah, his hair just like mine," type of thing. But like
Yes.
what they did from him though,
Yes.
and I'll never forget that moment, man,
Yeah.
because that's the whole point of when I think of representation and content is just doing things in my own unique way, and not conforming my blackness in any type of way, form, or fashion. Is to hopefully liberate others to do the same thing or feel that power that comes to that, or just know that you can be yourself and look how you want to look.
That's
and
right.
still be successful in life and whatever that means for you. So, man, I'll never forget that moment, man.
Yeah, man, the visibility piece is so important, especially in the communities that I organize in. We got, Black and brown constituencies in Nashville and throughout the state of Tennessee, and oftentimes we don't get seen in the same way and with the same nuance as other folks. And so it was great for Caden to see, the brother with natural hair and his locks. He's grown his locks out since then. And so it's great that we have those examples and those role models and people to look up to, because that visibility is so important. We see it in the stories that get told about Nashville, and there's certain parts of the community that aren't treated in the same way as other parts. And so it's important for us to be seen and be viewed in the ways that we want to be seen and viewed.
Man, we're gonna get into a whole lot of black voter stuff.
Yeah, we're gonna do a lot of black stuff.
I wanna get a little bit of the origin story of what that looks like for you. We know you're a Fiskite.
Yeah.
And so what was your journey before coming to Nashville and attending Fisk? And like the inspiration around like kind of, was it a catalyst? Was it something that really inspired you to be the person and do the work that you do today?
Yeah, man. Well, shout out to you, first of all. Long time watcher, first time attendee. I can remember when Deep Dish Conversations and you and I were just talking about it as an idea, and to see how it's grown. Over 200 episodes. It's really an honor and a privilege to be here. I feel like this is, like home. This is a sacred space.
It is. It's definitely home.
It's an honor to be here and on the show with you. And shout out to you for all the work that you're doing in the community. My personal story takes a lot of detours and intersections. When I was a kid, my mother was a school teacher. My father was in the military and later in law enforcement. So we moved a lot. We moved 15 times in 17 years.
Wow.
So I'm always kind of the new person in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And so when I got the opportunity to come away to school, leaving Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and coming to Nashville, I'd never been to Nashville, and came here, and ultimately became a student at Fisk, became a Jubilee singer, got an opportunity to travel
I didn't know you was a Jubilee singer.
Right.
You got a whole Jubilee singer.
Yeah. So the history of Music City and all of those things were things that I was kind of aware of, but just being here and being a part of that legacy was really amazing and incredible. Shout out to the Wakanda Chorale, Wakanda Forever. They're an organization of singers and performers, some form of Jubilee singers, others who are part of the Aristocrata Bands, now the Grammy award-winning Aristocrata Bands at TSU, some professionals, some semi-professionals who come together and sing and celebrate Black culture, Black heritage, Black community, and have a kind of a safe haven for folks who have a musical legacy and connection. And so being a part of those kinds of groups helps to sustain me in the work of social justice movement. But when I originally came to Nashville and ultimately became a student at Fisk, I came during an era and a time when we were learning about these great Fiskites in history, the Du Boises and the John Lewises and the Diane Nashes, and those folks who contributed to the legacy of social justice in Nashville in the first in the 1800s with the Jubilee Singers and the founding of the university, but then later with the 1960s civil rights movements and sit-ins. So many of those great luminaries came through Fisk, and so being a part of that community and that legacy was very special. I was a student there and studied religion and philosophy, so learned a lot from folks like Revis Mitchell. And shout out to the designer of this shirt. I want to point it out real quick.
Yeah.
We got Duke, Revis, Maupin, Linwood, and Friend, those Fiskites who were in the audience who were from the eras of the 80s, 90s, 2000s, early 2010s, and so forth, will remember some of those luminaries and names who helped to make us into the Fisk family that we are. But there were folks who were on campus who really had an indelible impression on my acculturation and my growth. And then later, you know, I leave Fisk, go into corporate America, work for these Fortune 500 companies, and I'm feeling kind of disconnected from that legacy in some ways, making some good money, but not really making a good difference or getting into good trouble. So I felt kind of compelled to get involved more in social justice work in the aftermath of the Trayvon Martin killing in 2012. And so that's kind of where the major markers started for me. Had the opportunity to connect with some folks who I knew who were students at Vanderbilt before then, folks like Rashida Fatuga from Gideon's Army.
Yeah.
She kind of gave me my first introduction and connection to movement work here locally in Nashville, supporting the work of the Driving While Black Report in 2016, which was kind of a canary in the coal mine for what was going to happen with Daniel Hambrick, Jacquees Clemens, those folks, and later the creation of the Community Oversight Board. So that's kind of like the quick and dirty version. But having those connections and relationship to some of the folks who were on the ground, my first paid organizing position was with a group called the Equity Alliance. Charlene Oliver, Tequila Johnson, shout out to them, Black women doing great work. Being a part of the Tennessee Black Voter Project, where we got busy registering Black voters in the state of Tennessee in all 95 counties, and the work was so successful. We registered nearly 100,000 Black and brown voters throughout the state of Tennessee.
Wow.
And the work was so good, right? We're meeting people at hookah bars and local nightclubs and at the washateria and, you know what I'm saying, gas stations, folks where people were hanging out, but where we had opportunities to have deep and probative conversations with Black and brown folks in community and other folks too, to kind of figure out what we needed to be centering as our Black print for outreach and issue-based advocacy in Tennessee. And we were so successful that the state of Tennessee tried to criminalize mass voter registration statewide because of the work of groups like the Equity Alliance.
That's crazy. That's how you know you're powerful.
That's how you know you're doing something.
When they try to criminalize what you're doing, you can't get no bigger hater than that.
You can't get no bigger hater than that. And so shout out to the Tennessee legislature. We coming for you. Anyway, the work that we were doing around registering and educating Black voters was very inspiring to me. And then later led to me having the opportunity to work with some national groups like Black Voters Matter. Shout out to Cliff Albright and Latasha Brown for the amazing and incredible work that they have been doing in a number of different contexts throughout the Deep South and the Midwest, making sure that Black voters matter to everybody and making sure that Black communities can really tap into the power that we have at our disposal. And so having the opportunity to work with some local groups, some national groups, and really just to learn from people who have really been luminaries in this space and their examples of commitment and dedication to Black people and Black communities is really why I do this work.
Man, so look, I'm glad y'all got the bio now. Y'all got it? He's tapped in. And so that's why this brother is here to really, we really finna extrapolate on some real deep things since around Blackness in this social change, social justice movement. And also, of course, you know, keep it solution based and what can we do as a community, and maybe even what can allies do as well.
Absolutely.
To support Black political power. How would you define Black political power in Nashville, the Middle Tennessee area today?
I appreciate that question. And so I'm reminded when I think about Black political power and Black social justice movements of a quote from one of my luminaries in my head, one of my mentors in my head, Dr. Cornel West.
Okay.
And so he talks about
who's running for president.
Shout out to Dr. Cornel West, 85. And what Dr. West describes when he talks about Black people and people in general, but I think it's very seminal for Black people, is he talks about how justice is what love looks like in public. And it's just like tenderness and kindness is what love looks like in private. I think that with Black people and oftentimes what has happened to us and the experience that we've had both with the institution of chattel slavery, Black liberative movements, the struggle for Black lives, the movement for Black lives, is we're always trying to tap in to the humanity that we all share. And that's a global humanity, that's a part of our global experience. as oppressed peoples, but also as liberating peoples. And so it's really about understanding the ways in which Black people relate to one another, our cultural nuances and our connections, but also the ways in which we are a part of this legacy of struggle. And that struggle is not just about sad times and frustration and the blues and all of those things. It also is about liberation. So the example of the Jubilee Singers, these were people who were, mere years separated from actual institution of chattel slavery, and we're creating this university.
Right.
And we're at a stage right now where it's on a precipice of failure. And it seems like so often in Black communities, we are right on the precipice of this major catastrophe. But they come together and they use the sorrow songs, the Jubilee songs that are about liberation and freedom and struggle and hard times. And they bring those songs to the masses.
Right.
And it becomes the first popularized music form that is American made, that is traveling all over the world. The story of how Nashville became the music city and the fact that the Jubilee Singers are traveling on their international tour with Queen Victoria, and the first thing that she says when she hears them, she's like, oh my God, their voices are so beautiful, you must come from the music city.
Right.
And so a lot of folks just don't know that history, and so they think Music City is a moniker because of country music and all the music, industry folks and all those things. But having that legacy of struggle and freedom, and having that at the root of so much of what we experience here in Nashville, we really have an embarrassment of riches. And then to have both that story connected to the longer story of liberative struggle in Nashville through the 1960s with the Diane Nashes and John Lewises and those folks who were civil rights leaders demanding that, the city be as good as its promise, and understanding that legacy of struggle when Diane Nash confronted then Mayor Ben West at the Capitol and said, do you think it's right for Black people to be treated as second-class citizens but be expected to be contributors to the economy? Do you think that we should desegregate these lunch counters? As a man, do you see our humanity? And so this is really top of mind for me, mostly because of a lot of the conversations that I've been having with young people who really want to get into community organizing, and those who are young at heart too, who just really want to understand more about how movements grow and build. And so one of the things that I mentioned in the book and that I'll mention here is that a lot of what I've learned about how to be an effective community organizer, I really learned as a kid from my grandmother. My grandmother, shout out to Alina Nellie Johnson, for being my first example of what it means to be a community organizer, because when the community needed food, needed resources and support, my grandmother had an 8th grade education and 2 shotguns, and so what you're not finna do is play with her. But also what she taught me through what I describe as a gumbo litany. She putting together that gumbo and making sure that everybody in the community eats, is that we need to address the material concerns and conditions of our people. Even before Jesus ministered to the people, he fed them. And so she's a living embodiment of an example of what it means to bring people together in unity. You bring them around, a pot of gumbo, and you feed them, and then you address and listen to the needs and the concerns that they have. My grandmother used, what I call God's divine arithmetic. She had one mouth and 2 ears, and so she always listened twice as much as she spoke. And she was always there to be a sounding board for the people in the community who desperately needed somebody to go to. A lot of our folks have been through deeply traumatizing experiences, both as a community and as individuals. And we don't have a lot of people to talk to. And Black men especially oftentimes do not have folks that they feel comfortable being able to open up to and be vulnerable with. And so if folks are interested in becoming a community organizer, before you can organize the community, you really got to be able to address the deeply rooted traumas that you have within yourself.
Organize yourself.
Organize yourself. What makes you tick? Why is it that you want to do certain things and want to avoid other things? What is it about the world in which you are navigating that has impacted you, and how has it impacted you in ways that maybe you weren't aware of? And what can you do about that? What can you do to address those needs and concerns? How do you tap into the power that you have as an individual so that you can help others to reveal the power that they have in themselves?
Now, man, that's deep, and I can't wait till that book to come out. That's crazy. That's crazy. We all got books. We all dropping books. Something in the water.
I'm writing the book that I wish I had when I was starting as an organizer.
You filling the void. And that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
Man, let's get into the voting.
Yeah. Here we go. Let's get into
Let's
it.
get into it, man.
Let's get into it.
So we've had discussions about voting,
Yeah.
and has voting been beneficial to Black folks since we've been, permitted to vote?
Yeah.
Speak on that a little bit and your thought process of voting. What should people go into the mindset when they're voting? How should they be voting? Because again, it's so many different levels when we talk about when it comes to Black people voting.
Right.
Because I think we carry so much with that because people literally died and bled for us to have the right to vote.
Yes.
Does that supersede something if it's not beneficial to you? If you do, so I want us to unpack that.
Let's unpack it.
And have a mini masterclass on what that means, and give something for people to think about.
Yeah.
When we're talking about voting, and are we voting for tangible things, self-interest?
Right.
And if it's not into my, skin color of the candidate, all of those things, right? And then I want to pivot and kind of talk about this mayoral election.
Yes, I appreciate you setting the stage for that. So, I want to get a couple of things in context as we're talking about
Let's
the
go.
importance of Black voting. So, on the one hand, we've got to talk about the history of how we got to this moment because, we're in this very anti-CRT, anti-history moment. So I want the audience to really be able to get the benefit of why it is that we're coming to this conversation where I'm coming from. So we start at, discussions around chattel slavery and how so much of America's incubation has been kind of in this crucible of oppression, right? So we have all of these multiple marginalized groups and peoples who are coming to this land. First, the indigenous who were already here, right, are supplanted and driven in through genocide and threats of violence by the colonizers who come here, clear the land, take so many of the people away, and there's this, this birth in blood that happens in this country.
Right.
And then as a result of the transatlantic slave trade and individuals who were brought here, forced to come here and chains to work the land, 400 years of oppression, so much deeply rooted trauma that happens as a result of that. And then out of that trauma comes things like, the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments to the Constitution, the Emancipation Proclamation before that, various struggles for fights and fights for liberation from indigenous people, other peoples on the land for a long period of time. So there's a long history that we've got to talk about before we even get to the struggle for enfranchisement and voting, particularly for Black people. But now that we're here and we're talking about that after the Emancipation Proclamation, 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments, Black men specifically having the right, quote unquote, to vote in the United States, but really not really having the opportunity. Because especially in the South, you might try to exercise that right, and you might very, very well be risking your life in doing so. And so after the period of Reconstruction, where there are some gains and some opportunities, some Black people even get elected to public office in deep southern states like Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia and those places, but there's this ongoing struggle. And what we see is in the aftermath of the Civil War, right, there's this massive backlash to try to limit the opportunities that are available during the Reconstruction period. And so for many years after that, the Jim Crow laws and the codes that basically govern the function and the behavior of Black people, both in the South and in the North, are really putting pressure on those rights and responsibilities that we have around voting. And so there's this ambivalence that is constantly happening around Black men and then later Black women after the signing of the 19th Amendment, where white women get the right to vote. Black women are really able to try to push and get some gains and opportunities to demand that their rights be heard as well in the 1920s. So fast forward, we are in this moment in the 1960s where these struggles over civil rights and human rights and segregation and all of those things really starting in their impetus in the 1950s with the Brown versus Board of Education decision that seeks to desegregate schools and public accommodations, and later the Montgomery bus boycotts. And shout out to Montgomery, who is still in the news now. If you see a folding chair and you don't think Montgomery, you're missing out on your opportunity. But so many people.
We gotta leave that at Montgomery too. not the Montgomery ball, but the bus boycott. Because I want to bring something up about that. That sits, when I think about organizing, that's like top tier for me.
Oh, yeah.
But
Oh, yeah.
but
Top tier organizing.
Top tier organizing.
But these ongoing struggles, and some of this stuff is, heavy. And, we're talking about fights and struggles for
Yeah.
liberation, but we're also talking about black joy and liberation.
You're right.
And the rise of blues and rise of jazz and house music and
Right.
bounce music and all of these forms of hip hop. Shout out to hip hop 50 years.
Yeah,
And
for
I mean,
sure.
that's an amazing milestone for our people to celebrate and our contributions to be acknowledged. But we got all of these things in the mixing bowl.
Yeah.
And all of these things, to go back to the metaphor about the gumbo, all of this is in the gumbo. The root of enslavement and segregation and all of the other forms of oppression and disappointment and frustration, but they are the base of what make our country what it is and the base of the wealth upon which the country was built. And the power dynamics that black people have played a role in and been leveraged and a part of are critically important in so many of those social movements. And thus, just here in the United States, not to mention the global movements for black liberation all over the world. And so we're in this moment now, in the aftermath of the Obama presidency, which took a long time to get here in 2008, but finally, change has come to America, which was a wonderful pronouncement of hope and change from the Obama presidency. But also, we see the hood still look the same as it did, multiple generations before and even thereafter. So we got many challenges that we face within the black community that are often connected to this issue of class and not just race. And so working class and poor black folk are treated with a particular amount of caste system right here in the United States, right? And we see that as evidenced in the ways in which many black communities are disinvested in and disempowered and underutilized and underdeveloped. And certainly in some ways are subjected to predatory investment. We saw that in the aftermath of the 2020 tornadoes and during the height of the uprisings that were happening in the country.
They're talking about that happening in Hawaii now.
Absolutely. So we see the same kind of predatory efforts being made to displace the indigenous folks from the island and then take over the land by colonizers. And so we saw some of those same dynamics at play in March of 2020 after those tornadoes in North and East Nashville, where folks were coming in and seeing people in a vulnerable position, offering them money and saying, hey, we'll pay you to be able to, start over again. But if you get a small amount of money, there's nowhere in Nashville now that you can live with that amount of money that they were offering. And so groups like the Equity Alliance and Stand Up Nashville, shout out to Odessa Kelly and those folks over there who saw what was happening in their Don't Sell Out North initiative and say, hey, listen, you don't have to sell your home right away. We can try to help you to triage and provide support until FEMA and some of the government agencies can come in and provide you with some additional support. So there's so many factors that have impacted the lives of black people. So it's important that we use whatever tool is in our toolbox to make sure that black people feel connected to the process of civic engagement, are not being just impacted by these systems and structures and institutions and individuals, but have a way to engage with that process that gives them the sense of empowerment that they truly and rightfully have. And so we should be engaging in whatever way that's possible. That looks like voting, right? That looks like organizing through a community lens or through individual organizations coming together and coalitions being built. It looks like making sure that we are restoring and addressing the issues and the impacts individually on the lives, particularly of poor and working class folks and indigenous folks and immigrants to the community. Because when we talk about black voters, we often talk about black American folks, but we don't want to leave out our folks from the Caribbean and our folks from the continent who are a part of this discussion in this process as well. And so we've got to understand that there are both and propositions. We should be looking at this, and I think that this is a dual-tiered strategy that I learned in some of the organizing spaces that I've been a part of. Just like in history when it took, an Emancipation Proclamation, and we also had Harriet Tubman out there at the same time with the Underground Railroad, right? We got to have an Emancipation Proclamation where we address issues of policy and change some of the policies and structures within our government and our institution. But we also got to have an Underground Railroad where we free our people by any means necessary.
And I think that's important to bring out, that we need all of those collectively. And they don't have to be adversarial to one another.
Absolutely not.
It's like, hey, whichever one's resource best benefits you at that moment, take advantage of that.
That's right.
But it's not one is better over the other.
I fully agree.
And unfortunately, sometimes those sentiments are articulated in the organizing space, which just is not healthy.
Yeah, man.
And so hopefully that's in the book somewhere.
Yeah, that's gonna be. We're gonna talk about that.
Yeah.
So there's a chapter in the book that's called "What's Beef," right? So that's a line, that's a line from Biggie Smalls, right? That talks about what happens in the aftermath of situations when
Right.
things get a little awry, right? And the
Yeah.
line says, "What's beef? Beef is when you make your enemy start your." So it's like it's a situation where basically you are at loggerheads.
Yeah.
With lots of individuals, and it talks about what beef looks like
Right.
in hip hop situations, but what beef looks like in the black community and some of these black organizing situations can be very different. It could be one group or one organization kind of moving in, or what appears to be moving in on the turf of what another organization has been using as its bread and butter.
If an organization feels that way,
Right.
this gives us some gems. Give
Right.
us a little sneak peek of what's in the book. If an organization is feeling that way, that hey, man, I kind of feel like this other organization is kind of in my territory,
Right.
or in my wheelhouse, and this is our thing, right?
Yeah.
What do you feel the best practice is to mitigate that and build, not burn the bridge down, and not saying people have to be besties, but have a healthy relationship and understanding that we're both trying to combat these social constructs in a particular way.
Yeah.
How can we mend this and not feel like we're the enemy of each other? Because we know we're not. But hey, some people egos and pride and all of these things. How can one of those sides come to the table and say, hey, like we it's no issue, it's no beef.
Right. It's
How
no
do we
beef.
mitigate that?
Right. Oh man, I love that question. So I'll start by saying that.
And then we're gonna get back to voting. But
Yeah, we're gonna get back to voting in a second. So there's a famous quotation that I use a lot in my facilitation, in my training with young organizers, and it's a quotation I've heard attributed to many different people. But the quotation, the approximation of the quote is something like this: "We have no permanent friends or permanent enemies, only permanent interests." And so that sounds very like savage. First of all, it's savage, but it also should inform the ways in which we tactically and strategically operate within movement spaces and organizing spaces.
Yeah.
Because sometimes the person who's in opposition to you in some way, or maybe has a different tactic or strategy from the way that you would approach things, can be used as an iron to help sharpen your iron, sharpen your messaging, help you to be more effective in the way that you do outreach, or to help you to reveal the areas that might be unseen in the way that you're using your tactic or strategy.
I love that.
So, there are going to be folks, right, who are more the kinds of organizations and groups that are about reforms. I see this all the time when we start talking about police accountability, for example. There are folks who believe that we need to reform policing, that we need to change and have like certain representation among individuals in police departments who are melanated folks, who maybe come from black and brown communities, or come from communities that have been impacted, so that those communities can be better policed. And other people who say, you know what, we need to just completely scrap this process.
Dismantle
I
everything.
am completely about dismantling this whole structure and system. I'm abolitionist, right? And so if we are to look at that form of addressing a particular issue around police accountability through the lens either of reform or of abolition, they may appear to be on two different sides of the spectrum. And in many ways they are. But the reality, the lived experience for black people is that whatever the circumstance is, whenever I have an interaction with law enforcement or some other state agency, I don't want to be subjected to forms of physical or psychological violence.
Right.
I don't want to fear for my life when I'm driving home to meet my family.
Right.
And because there are multiple parties in that process who care about the need for there being a better relationship between local organizations who do law enforcement and the communities that are being policed, we've got to work together collaboratively, whether those changes look like reforms, whether those changes look like abolition, whether it looks like a combination of all of those things in a pathway heading toward the other. Like, we got to be able to work together. And while your organization might be for reform and another may be for abolition or vice versa, it doesn't mean that you can't work together, that you can't collaborate together. And here's an example of what that looks like in the Nashville context. So back in 2016, the Driving While Black report, Gideon's Army, is released. Several other partners are a part of it, and they say, look, black people are being stopped at 6 times more instances in North Nashville Communities 37208, which the Brookings Institution later said was the community that had the highest rate of formerly incarcerated persons in the country per capita. We're talking about some 500,000 individuals who have been impacted by the criminal legal system in the state of Tennessee. Right. Many of those folks live in zip codes like 37208. We got to do something about this. Right. This is a powder keg and a spark would light an explosion. We've got to do something to address it. At the time, right, when Gideon's Army and their partners mentioned that this was happening, the police department couldn't argue with the statistics because the data came from their dashboard. Right. It came from their information and the Freedom of Information request. And so instead of saying, you know, we don't like your data, instead they described the project and the Driving While Black report as morally disingenuous. Now that's basically just SAT word speak for we can't argue with the facts. Right. But we don't like how the facts make us look. Right. The facts make us look really, really bad, maybe even racist in the way that we're implementing this stop procedure. And so Gideon's Army was later validated by a group out of New York City called the Policing Project when they, a couple of years later, said, you know what? Gideon's Army is right. They're stopping these black people a lot more. Really? Right. Imagine that. And after it cost the city $250,000, imagine this black-led organization with a black woman at the helm and all these black and indigenous and immigrant groups as a part of the process of collecting data. Somehow they were able to find the truth magically. But at any rate, that information was available to them, and they knew that something serious was likely to happen. And so very, very shortly thereafter, Jacquees Clemens in, I think, 2017, is shot and killed by a law enforcement officer under very unusual circumstances. And not even a year later, Daniel Hambrick is shot and killed. Same community, same 37208, zip code, same situation. And so what could have happened is what later happened in the international and the national context with Breonna Taylor in Louisville, Kentucky, and George Floyd in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Yeah. There are these major protests and uprisings all over the country and around the world. People have got to do something. George Floyd's name, Breonna Taylor's name become hashtags. We cannot allow this to continue. Right. And so all of these uprisings are happening all over the country. But here, in Nashville, locally, because of the instances of police violence with Jacquees Clemens and Daniel Hambrick, there were already people coming together from a lot of different ideological perspectives. You had folks there who were former law enforcement officers to abolitionists coming together and forming the Community Oversight Now coalition and saying, we've got to do something about this issue of community oversight of police and police violence and the lack of trust that exists between community members and law enforcement here in our city. And so shout out to folks like Sekou Franklin, who contributed to the intellectual data collection and the crunching of the numbers, making sure that we got all of those numbers right, and all the folks who participated in the Community Oversight Now coalition, Melissa Cherry and some others, who really helped to make sure that we were striking the right chord, bringing together folks from, the Beacon Center participated in the Driving While Black report, and Gideon's, all these groups coming together. And they finally put together an effort as a part of the Community Oversight Now coalition to propose something called the Metro Community Oversight Board. I had the opportunity to sit for a brief time on that board, to participate in that process, which was amazing and incredible. But the Community Oversight Board now is being threatened, being attacked by something called state preemption, which we're going to go through in just a moment.
Hey, y'all getting a master class right now. That's a little bit of the book. That's a little bit of the book. That's a little bit of the book.
Little sneak peek.
I want to double back to the voting.
Yeah.
How would you respond to the narrative like, oh man, voting don't help black folks?
That's a very common narrative that I hear discussed in a lot of spaces that I'm in, particularly in some of the spaces where folks have been deeply, deeply impacted by the criminal legal system and have lost the right to vote. So,
and to even giving more context for myself, when I think of voting, I think of how is my group, community, culture, black people, black Americans, benefiting from this as a group, not as an individual, but as a group. And that for me means socially and economically.
Yes.
Tangibles.
Very, very good point.
And so that's when I think about the purpose of voting for me, specifically.
Yes.
So with that, I
thank you for that added context, because I think it's going to relate to the analogy that I'm about to use. So when I think about voting in the process of voting, we talked about that history of how black people for so long were denied the right to vote, and then finally got the right to vote, but really didn't have access to the vote because of Jim Crow laws and some of these poll taxes, other things. And so I see voting in many ways as I see the fingers on the hand, right? Now you might be able to operate your hand without a thumb.
Right.
You might. But it's going to make it difficult for you to grasp things because
Right.
the opposable thumbs for human beings is something that makes us very effective at being able to manipulate and move things, grab things. So voting is like one of your fingers, right? It's a finger on the hand that is used to be effective in actually moving things along and getting things done. But you can't do that just in isolation. If all you do is vote, but you're not educating yourself about the importance of how it is that voting is connected to your rights and your process. People who are selected to be a part of the Community Oversight Board, for example, or to serve on juries because of registered voters. That's how they select those folks. So if you're not registered to vote and you're not able to do that, it's hard for you to be able to participate in a lot of those processes, for example. You got to also connect voting not only with education, but with empowerment. You can't do that just in isolation by yourself. You need an organization or a group to be a part of so that you can ultimately work together to be able to address the material concerns and needs of your community. So organizing is another one of those fingers on the hand that you got to be able to use. And then it's important for you to be able to really connect with your economic power. Because if you're not voting at the polling place, but you spending your money with people who are oppressing you, then you're undermining your own power, your own credibility as an individual and a person in the community who has that power. So it's all a part of and parcel to the process of self-empowerment. Voting is one of those tools, one of those fingers on the hand, but it done in isolation doesn't really help you to build the mighty fist that you're going to need to be able to fight against these structures and systems that have been oppressing our people for millennia.
When I think about voting, the tangibles, the economics, right? Now we have more black elected officials in elected seats than ever, and state legislative, local. We it's more than ever because you know opportunities, right?
Yes.
But things economically seem to be the same.
Yes.
And some things are worse.
Yeah.
Home ownership is about the same. Actually, the ownership of land is down. Incarceration is up. We're more educated, but we don't have any more wealth as a group. Than we had before we were 65, 64. And so how do we get voting or building political power to affect those things as a group? I know you and I can make it as a individual. We can go make $1 million, $1 billion, whatever. We know successful black people. But as a group, we're still in the same, if not worse place than we were when we could vote. That's why you hear many of our elders saying, hey, I wish we could just really go back, like segregation. Because we had more.
The separate part wasn't the part that was the problem. It was the equal part.
It was the equal part. Like we had more. And so how can we, does the system, and this is my thing too, like pouring into a system that I know that's against me, that's not for me, but it's like, but participating in it, how does that all get tangled up? And is it a fixable way to get around it to where we actually see who we vote for be reflected in actually the system doing what it's supposed to do to help black folks specifically, but everybody, but black folks specifically.
Black folks specifically we talking about.
In these social constructs that we're living under.
That's such a fundamental question. So I'll answer it a couple different ways. So one of the things that was at the heart of your question is like, so what's really happened because of voting, right? What's really changed? And in a lot of ways, unfortunately, I'm gonna be honest with you, there was an article that I read a couple of days ago that's written, I believe, as a part of the commemoration and continuation of the March on Washington, which will be celebrated or commemorated in about the 60-year anniversary is this year. Folks are going to be gathered in Washington, D.C. Representatives from a few different organizations that I'm a part of will be there in D.C. During the commemoration, and they've described it as a continuation, not just a commemoration of the March on Washington. And Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s son, Martin III, has penned an article and a thought piece about what has changed in the intervening 60 years. And sadly, not enough has changed. And so in many ways, when we start talking about the importance of voting, people point to that example and say, see, ain't nothing changed. And me voting doesn't make a difference. It's not important. And I understand both the frustration and in many ways share the sentiment that people should have about, you know, what little progress has been made. But I want to encourage us to think. I'm a big fan of Black futurism, right? And so I think about the ways in which we vision different possible worlds and vision different possibilities where Black people are able to have and achieve a measure of liberation and freedom.
Yeah.
And so what I think about is the fact that when we had so little, when we had, you know, when we were just coming out of, or even in many ways we're still in the moment of, historical moment of chattel slavery, there were those folks who stood up and who fought back. There were the public intellectuals and the you know, the muckrakers and the good troublemakers of their time, the Harriet Tubmans and and so many others who were part of that legacy of fighting back. Frederick Douglass, right?
Like,
so
man,
many.
they was all doing that same.
All during that same time,
That's
right?
crazy.
Martin Delaney, and you know, so many people who were fighting back and saying that we are not allowed, we're not going to roll over and lay down and allow this system to destroy us. And so these examples of freedom fighters and liberators who are a part of this long legacy, we have a responsibility in picking up the mantle to take our place among those luminaries and say, you know what, this is what contribution I'm going to make. And I've chosen the lane of voting and voter empowerment as one of those places where I can stake my claim and say, you know what, we're going to fight for every inch.
Everybody got their lane.
And so, you know, during the process of redistricting, which I know is I mean, I say the word redistricting, and we're going to have to rebrand that thing because people's eyes glaze over. But here's why I'm mentioning why it's important. So every 10 years.
Redlining.
Right, red line.
Let's call it what it is.
Red line is what it is, exactly. So when we talk about what happens in communities, every 10 years, the U.S. Census does an enumeration count of all the people in the country. And they do that not because they're trying to track your social media, they're trying to get at you. They do that because they want to make sure that numerically we understand who's here and who's going to be drawing down on resources. It's all about money.
Who can pour into the funds?
Who can pour into the funds, where the
into
tax
the
dollars going to come from, all of those things. So every 10 years they do that census enumeration. And people who are counted during that census enumeration, some of them are American citizens, some of them are green card holders, some of them are undocumented folks, some of them are, you know, folks who have been incarcerated or detained. And so everybody gets enumerated. Here's why that matters. When you count the number of people in the country and you know where they are and where the resources should be allocated, that's ideally where you should send the bulk of the resources for infrastructure projects and highways. I know here in Nashville, folks get hit a pothole every other day. That's messing with your
every other street.
Every other street. And so the money that comes in to address those, you know, those state and local issues is money drawn down by tax dollars, which are made possible by the census enumeration and redistricting. Here's why that matters to the political context. When they draw those lines, you may be drawn into or out of a district that allows you to be able to coalesce with your neighbors to build a block of power. And when they bifurcate those lines and break up communities with cracking and with fracking, with other kinds of forms of undermining the power in those communities, that generally targets Black and brown communities and working class communities specifically. In the Nashville context, that's what happened in our congressional districts. And those congressional districts that then made the city of Nashville, which was one unified district, into 3 fractured districts spread out in 3 different directions, that then makes it more difficult for Nashvillians to be able to elect the representative of their choice. So you don't have as much power, as much influence in Washington, D.C. in the allocation of those resources and addressing the needs and concerns in Nashville as you would have with Nashville being a unified district. And so in order to be able to participate in that process and to elect those people of your choice, you got to be involved in that process of redistricting, understand how it works, understand that it happens every 10 years and the next one's going to be happening in 2030. And what else is going to be happening around 2030, right? The demographic shift of what is happening in this community, both in Nashville and in the state of Tennessee and in nationally in the country. America is poised to become, for the first time, a majority, a people of color community, a majority people of color country. And that's going to have some far-reaching implications in how resources are allocated in the community in the United States and in the state of Tennessee, as well as in the local community. So if you want to have a stake in that process, you got to be engaged in as many ways as possible. But there are a lot of folks who have been pushed out of that process. And so they're like, I don't care about no voting. I lost the right to vote anyway. I'm a felon. I got this, that, and the other thing. even folks who have been impacted by the criminal legal system have a role to play.
Right.
And there are many ways in which we are reimagining democratic institutions to provide folks with an opportunity to plug in. That looks like things like people's assemblies, for example. So the Nashville People's Budget Coalition is one of those examples of a people's assembly where folks, no matter where you come from, all you got to be is from, all you got to do is be in Nashville to plug into that process and be able to say, well, this is what I think some of these tax dollars need to go to. In groups like the Black Nashville Assembly, for example, Black people are coming together from all walks of life in community and saying, these are the issues that we need to center as a part of our Black politics, as a part of our Black cultural education, so that we can center the needs and the concerns of our growing community, so that we don't forget our priorities when it comes election time, when it comes to the issues of when we select individuals who are going to be representing us, whether or not they're Black folks, are they centering our needs and concerns as a community? Which brings me to one issue that I really want to say before we take the break. A lot of folks have been looking at and seeing what has been happening in this most recent election.
Yeah, oh well, let's get into it. Well, before you get into that,
we're gonna take a step back. Okay,
I want to take a step back. I want to take a step back before you get into that, because I think before we get into that, we gotta deal with, again, as Black people, when we see candidates a lot of times, regardless of what they were running for, it's like, okay, they're Black. Right? And a lot of folks, because of our Blackness, because of our unique experience, we just gonna say, hey man, they Black, we're gonna vote for them.
Like Obama, Black, president, Black, I'm doing it.
And then what happens, whether it's 2 years later, 4 years later, 8 years later, whatever it may be, we say, damn, they didn't do nothing for Black people. Right, which is a common theme. Like, what did they do for Black people? They didn't do anything for Black people, right? And to even more context, we're in a country that hasn't done anything exclusively to benefit Black people on no type of level, especially a federal level. But that's just, they'll do something for people of color, minorities. They'll use all these other broad terms, but exclusive for Black people, like reparations, has not happened, which is one of the
and other groups have gotten reparations.
Other groups have gotten. That's one of my biggest things. Like some about Black, exclusively doing something Black. It's the anti-Blackness. But anyway,
anti-Blackness deeply at the root of it.
And so, whether it's 8 years later, we like, damn, they ain't do nothing for Black people. Speak on that a little bit as far as from a voting strategy, psychological standpoint, as being a Black person.
Yes.
And when you see another Black person, it's like, man, well, they Black, but man, they ideas, their ideology don't seem like they in Black interest.
And
so
going back to that whole quote about, not permanent friends, permanent interests. I mean, not permanent enemies, but permanent interests. There's another saying, that I think, and we talked about the Montgomery Brawl just briefly. Shirley Chisholm would talk about how, if they don't bring you, they won't let you be at the table, you need to bring a folding chair, right? So, but what we as Black people have to be very intentional about in our understanding. And we have to be sophisticated in our analysis. Because just because a person has a Black skin doesn't mean they don't have broad interests. We have to be very, very careful about the ways in which we interact with and engage with political actors and folks who are in positions or entrusted with positions of authority. Because in truth, they are not the folks who have the power. We have the power. The community, the people have the power. Always. People always have the power. You've got to understand that there are people who are operating on the other side of that equation, though. Special interest groups and others who are trying to mitigate the power that you already have. And so we need to understand very, very intimately the difference between representation and empowerment. There's lots of Black people in positions of power, but if there are not Black issues that are centered in those positions of power, we are missing the mark. Listen.
A bar.
Black people have got to be just as sophisticated in our analysis of power as our opposition is, because you better believe they understand exactly what is going on with Black power. Here's an example of what that looks like in the Tennessee context. So recently I learned about this organization describing itself as the Tennessee 3-Pack. So a lot of folks who are in the audience, who are in Tennessee and Nashville, y'all know about the Tennessee 3. You know about Justin Jones, Justin Pearson, Gloria Johnson, and their protest in the well of the state capitol in the aftermath of the Covenant shooting. So these folks are coming in, they're saying, look, we got to do something about these guns and the accessibility to these guns. The gun violence is at an epidemic level. Our children, 3 children and 3 administrators at the Covenant School here in Green Hills in Nashville, shot and killed by an armed shooter. We got to do something. We cannot allow this to continue. And so understanding this and the ethos, the zeitgeist of the moment, there were some very sophisticated folks, I will say that they're in the opposition, who want to do nothing about gun violence, who in fact are taking support from gun lobbyists and gun manufacturers and don't want to hear from the voices of the people who have been impacted by gun violence. So this special session that's going to be starting in a couple days on Monday, folks are trying to center and have concerns and conversations about the need for reforms to address these issues and concerns around public safety. But instead, our governor wants to talk about what we're going to do about mental health, which again, I'm not saying mental health is not a concern or an issue. We absolutely need to be doing background checks and making sure that folks who are not mentally unwell or a danger to themselves or to other people are getting access to dangerous weapons. Absolutely, true. We agree there. But the other side in the proclamation says we're going to be talking about what we need to do to enhance punishments for juvenile offenders who use a gun to commit a crime. That's not what we asked for. We didn't say in an instance where young people are being shot and killed by bad actors who have weapons that what we need to be doing is further criminalizing the young people who have access to these weapons rather than doing something about the access for individuals who shouldn't have the guns. They got the wrong message. They didn't understand the assignment.
Yeah, they didn't.
The reality was people were demanding that we do something about access to these weapons so that we can stop this mass carnage and these mass shootings that are occurring on a regular basis. But the opposition heard, oh, what you want us to do is you want us to further criminalize young people who get access to a gun. That's what you're saying. That's not what we said at all. So what I'm saying about that is this. When they saw the Tennessee 3 into the well, they expelled Justin Jones, Justin Pearson. They were later reinstalled and have now been reelected to the state legislature. Shout out to the people of Nashville and Memphis who represent districts 51 and 86, doing what they could to make sure that those voices remain at the table. But the opposition didn't go to sleep.
No.
They decided they would create an organization called the Tennessee 3-Pack. People thinking, oh, well, here's my opportunity on a national scale, on a local scale, to sow resources and money into the Tennessee 3-Pack to support these folks, Justin Jones, Justin Pearson, and Gloria Johnson, to make sure that they can continue their good work. But no. If you follow the money, and you recognize who it is that's registered the Tennessee 3-Pack. It's a group of conservative Republican bundlers, many of whom have associations and connections with the NRA and with other kinds of gun manufacturing groups and gun rights groups. So this is literally the opposition using the phantasm of the Tennessee 3 image to try to raise money for opposition to everything that they stand for. Finessing, right? We've seen the finesse all the time. We hear about it in the news, and they often will put a black or brown face on the person doing the finessing, but very often the people who are really doing the finessing, the people who are really using these structures and systems to benefit and in some instances to undermine the power that we are building are folks who are standing on the opposite side of the dynamic that we are trying to create. So it's very important that we follow the money. It's very important that we understand who these actors are, what they're representing, and what positions they actually hold, whether or not they claim to be representing our interests. Because again, we got to turn back to the understanding of the difference between representation and empowerment. Just because somebody say they with you don't mean they really with you. And you got to make sure you always look for the receipts. Don't just look at the seat. Look for the receipts, because you got to see where these people get their money from and who's really backing them to truly understand what their values are.
Oh, man, because you coming back. You coming back. He's going to be a regular guest.
We're going to be back. We're going to be back. We're going to definitely do an aftermath show
for sure.
to talk about.
We're going to do something quarterly at least. At minimum.
Yes.
Taking everything that you said, and this is kind of why I want us to close on and leave people just thinking. Mayoral election. We had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 black mayoral candidates?
5 black mayoral candidates. I believe that's right.
5 black mayoral candidates, right? Now, talk about strategy. We talking about strategy.
We're talking about strategy. And when we talk about strategy, I know people that sounds like a very fancy word, but when we say strategy, what we really mean is numbers.
We talking about
what
numbers.
will be informing the numbers based on how you do the work.
Nashville, is a super majority white city. Black people is a super minority. We're not Memphis. Right.
We're not Memphis.
We're not
Memphis,
Memphis.
70% black. Nashville's closer to 30%. And when you talk about the people who are actually registered to vote and who engage in the process, it's probably closer to like 17, 15%.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, and we, no vote Tennessee. People do not turn out to vote in this state.
Oh my God.
Or in this
Tennessee's 50th in the country
Yeah.
in voter participation.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
there you go. So, all that.
Ain't but 50 states.
Yeah, ain't number 50. So, y'all do the math. We
do the
at
math.
the bottom. Ain't no, we can't go below us.
Right.
With all of that, we talk about numbers and strategy. With all of that now, if we wanted to even get a black mayor elected, it's hard to do.
Hard to do.
Damn near impossible.
It would take coalition support. It wouldn't just be black people alone.
Right, exactly. But do you feel going forward with that coalition building, if we do feel we want and need a black mayor, one that's also representative just not only of blackness, but ideas and all of the things we talked about just previously, right?
Yeah.
Number-wise and strategy-wise, do you believe it would make sense for coalition organizations, community to get behind, whether it's a secret closed-door meeting, whatever,
Right.
get behind one candidate and push him or her?
I think it's critical that black people understand, and I mentioned this before earlier in my remarks, we got to understand very, very intimately the importance of centering black needs and concerns in community. No matter who's in the position of power, no matter who is elected to the seat, our interests need to be at the table. Because if we are not at the table, we are likely on the menu.
Right.
So if we are not centering whatever those concerns are, be they public safety, public education, public health, if we're not addressing the issues of infrastructure, because all of those things are black issues. We got a public housing and a public an access to affordable housing and accessible housing challenge in Nashville right now. And many of the folks who are most impacted by that are working class folks, most of them black, brown, working class white folks. We are all issue-based folks, and we're not just one issue. So the idea of it being just a black candidate who's going to represent those interests is, I think, maybe a flawed analysis. We've got to understand the ways that we center black needs and concerns in community, issues around equity, diversity, inclusion, belonging. All of those things need to be articulated in a way that are addressing the needs and the concerns of the folks who are most impacted. People who are impacted by the criminal legal system need to be the ones who are making the rules and informing the policies around those kinds of structures and systems. If we're not doing that, then we're not really meeting the needs and the concerns of the people. So what we need to be really doing is making sure that whoever is ultimately elected, be it mayor, vice mayor, city council, school board, the local dog catcher, we need to make sure whoever that person is, that they are informed about the needs and the concerns of our community, and that they have a direct way to plug into people who are credible messengers and trusted people in our community, so that they are very well informed of what is important to us. And in that way, we get black issues centered, whether or not we have a black candidate or a black person in that position of power. But I think that what we can't do is we can't allow ourselves to rest on our laurels and allow this to be just an election by election thing. Elections come every 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, I think, for Senate.
You're right.
Judges are elected, but many of them are lifetime appointments. So
8 years here.
8 years in some instances. So and so what we got to do is we got to make sure that when we're selecting these candidates, or we're putting our money and our votes and our support behind these individuals, that we very clearly, number one, we understand what their platform is, what issues they really are centering in their platforms, and whether or not they align with our interests and our values. We also got to understand the context in which we're operating. So, Nashville is one of those cities, like you said, we're not a majority black city. We're probably a majority people of color city when we talk about indigenous folks and immigrants and other folks. And then we talk about the working class dynamic. We got to have a really good analysis that is very informed in both race and class narratives, so that we can do outreach to the various and disparate parts of our community and bring folks together. Shout out to groups like the Nashville Justice League, the Equity Alliance, and Turk Votes, and the Central Labor Council, who are bringing together those folks who are talking about those race class narratives in a meaningful and powerful way. But we got to do more of that. We've got to do more of that community collaboration to bring people to the table who have the same kinds of issues and concerns around the issues that matter most to Nashvillians. And we got to make sure that we keep lines of communication open with those folks. And we cannot, there's no way of dismissing and throwing away people. We have in our politics very much a transactional kind of situation. It's not relational.
Yeah.
And much of the organizing work that I do is all about relationship building.
It's all about relationship.
People don't care how much you know
Yeah.
until they know how much you care.
Right.
You got to show up for them when they need you.
Yeah.
That's why it's so important when things and disasters happen in our communities and we have the opportunity to come together. We got to bring everybody to the table to
Yeah.
make a contribution. And it's not going to always look the same. I mentioned also that my background is in music. I did some singing with the Jubilee Singers.
He was an
Now
old Jubilee singer.
Right. do some work now with the Wakanda Chorale, the W. Krim Singers. What I've learned from that has informed my organizing is everybody can sing from the same music sheet.
Yeah.
But we all don't have to sing the same part. I'm a bass.
Yeah.
I can't sing the soprano part. But we need the sopranos part to be strong. We need the altos to be strong. We need the tenor section to be real strong. Everybody's gonna bring their strengths together so that the ensemble can create a beautiful and meaningful piece of music. And organizing and voting and all of the elements of civic engagement are a part of creating the tapestry of that beautiful orchestra and chorus and the music that we are singing together. Everybody ain't gonna sing the same part.
Right.
But we all got to sing together on the same beat from the same music sheet so that we can help make sure that we're all in tune.
We all can have a solo.
And everybody ain't going to get a solo. Everybody ain't going to get a
solo.
solo. But it's the ensemble that
Yeah.
makes beautiful music together.
Timothy, man, I really appreciate this, man. And everybody, he's coming back because he's doing these master classes. But
We're gonna keep doing
We're gonna
these.
keep doing it, but like consistently having these conversations, talking about voter engagement, what that means, what that looks like from a strategy, from a numbers, but also from a solution-based lens of like what can we do to play our part. And I hope people really grasp that, man. So I appreciate you. Thank you.
Yes.
Flowers given to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bro.
And we did it.
Yeah, we did it, man. If you will allow me, I'm
Yeah.
gonna end this the way that I usually end a lot of my talks and trainings with a quote from one of my favorite luminaries in my head. I tell everybody I got these mentors in my head. Assata Shakur, who said, "It is our duty to fight for our people. It is our duty to win. We must love and support one another, for we have nothing to lose but our chains." Thank you.